Hello, y'all. Welcome to Hedgebrook's Cottage Chat. I have the honor of hosting these joyous conversations and amplifying the brilliant minds of our ever growing alumni community. Thank you all so much for joining me this month as we talk about connection in community, in home, and more with Carla Dupre and Ladee Hubbard. Carla Dupre is an author who writes fiction and also serves as an art ambassador, a literary consultant, the executive director of an award winning nonprofit, City Lit Project, which we will be partnering with later this year, and a national advocate of the literary arts. She's received fellowships for her fiction from Hedgebrook, including a stipend from the Whiting Foundation, Rhode Island Writers Colony for Writers of Color, the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts, Baldwin for the Arts, Martha's Vineyard Institute of Creative Writing, and the Poetry Foundation through Furious Flower Poetry Center. What I'm telling you is this person is a bad mamma jamma. Excerpts of her novel In Progress, Where the Spirit Meets the Bone, have appeared in the Pierian Literary Journal, Callaloo, and Potomac Review, and is forthcoming in the Illinois Review. I'm actually going to drop a link to her extended bio in the comments later because, like I said, this is just a portion of all the amazing things Carla Dupre brings to the table. Ladee Hubbard. Now, Ladee, I got some of her books right here on my shelf behind me because also, it turns out, a bad mamma jamma. Ladee Hubbard is the author of the novels The Talented Ribkins, which received a Hurston Wright Legacy Award and the Ernest J. Gaines Award, and The Rib King. Her short story collection, The Last Suspicious Holdout, was published in March of 2022. This person has been writing since the moment I met her, and I've seen piece after piece come out from her. She is a recipient of the 2022 Guggenheim Award and has also received fellowships from the Radcliffe Institute, the American Academy in Berlin, Camargo, and Sakatar. My name is Amber Flame, and I am the program director for Hedgebrook, as well as an alumna of the Writers in Residence program. I'm so thrilled to be your host for this conversation, which is streaming live Thursday, February 16th, 2022. Oh my goodness. Okay, we're here. We're doing this. Welcome. Hello, Ladee. Hello, Carla. How y'all doing?
Hi.
Hello. We're doing okay.
We're doing okay. We started chatting already backstage before we started the stream about what this connection was. And I had the mistake of thinking that they were both in residency together because I thought I was there with both of them at the same time. That turns out to not have been the case. So I met Carla in 2019 when I was there for a short weekend. And it turns out that we have weird community connections that are across the nation. Who knew that you would know the father of my child, or his mama, or his family, or be deep in that community? But I knew from the moment I met you, you were talking about how rare it was for you to get some time for yourself as a writer because you were an arts administrator.
Yes.
And I remember when I met Ladee, this is maybe why I connected the two of you. So we're trying to figure out if I met Ladee in 2017 when I was actually there for my residency too. Though I'm like, did you know Kate? And like, I want to name people. We're going to figure this out.
Yeah,
But at the time, you were about to publish The Talented Ripkins, I think.
that was 2017 then.
Okay, so then it must have been. All right.
Yeah.
And at the time, were you in edits or were you already working on the Rib King? Do you
I think
remember?
we've been working on the Rib King already.
Okay.
There was
Because
kind of overlap.
we were talking at the tape. I feel like it was something about food. And so that's why I think the Rib King was
Oh,
what you were writing.
yeah, yeah. That would
Okay.
make sense. That would make sense.
Right. Because the
Yeah,
Rib King, it turns out, has something to do with food.
yeah, yeah.
It's not this kind of rib. Well, it is this kind of rib, but for other people. But yes, beautiful people know beautiful people. Thank you, Lauren Anderson. Thank you for being here. This is our 35th year here at Hedgebrook. And as an alum, I'm like, it's about us. It's about the connections we make. It's about the people we know and get to know because of this beautiful experience that we got to have and share together. So thank you for kicking off our third season of Cottage Chats.
Yeah.
Here.
Happy to be here too.
So Carla asked if we were going to talk about writing. And I want you to jump in here, Carla, because I want to ask what does it take? What does it take? I know a little bit because I follow you on social media. So I know how busy your life is constantly. And is it only in residency space that you are able to carve out space for your writing? What is it taking at this point for you to be a writer and have that time?
Well, I can say this. I really admire anyone who can get up early in the morning or stay up late at night to do it. And that used to be me, but now
Couldn't be me.
because I'm involved in so many things, I need to go away. I need clear headspace. And the best way to do it is at a residency. I used to be a kitchen table writer, and to an extent I still am. But when I get to a residency, I can actually just melt into the work. I can let everything go after 2 days of settling in and really just be in the work. I treasure that.
Yeah.
If I'm home writing, it's in the morning, light my candles, light my incense, and just kind of prepare for the moment. But it's a little bit more difficult when you have children, even though they're adult children, when you run a nonprofit and when you are trying to be an advocate and an activist in so many ways. But the writing time I treasure. It's really important and it's really special.
Do you have a daily practice? Is there something that you cling to every day, even with it all?
With it all, I tell myself this: if I can't sit down to do the work, I at least have to still live like a writer. What does that mean? That means I still have to observe things in a different way. I still have to have some kind of joy in my ear where I'm not just taking on, it's not just an everyday day. If someone speaks, I look at the way they speak. I look what their body does. I love looking at strangers to see, what they're carrying when they walk. When I see a mother, I think about what her life must be like because, people think mothers are one way and there's so many different ways. I just kind of try to continue building those skills that writers need, breathing in words and listening to language and the way people speak and what they don't say. So those kinds of things that I enjoy that make me feel like I'm still a writer, or if I hear a phrase, a turn of phrase that just speaks to me, I sometimes will even wake up at night and write it down because it's so a part of, what I'm doing.
And you also learned that you ain't gonna hold on to it till morning. So
Oh my God, I did learn that. And here's the thing.
a hard lesson.
When I realized that early on, Amber, because sometimes I wouldn't write it down and say, oh, I kept thinking, oh, I'll remember it. You don't remember. You don't remember a thing. So I really trained myself, especially when I'm at a residency. If something comes to me late at night, just wake yourself up and write it down. Now, I don't get all the words spelled right because it's still in that haze, but I get the feeling, and it really has served me. Paying attention to yourself, your creative self, when it speaks to you that way. So, yes.
I love that, holding that still sacred, even, catching the muse when it lands on you, as I think of it. Now, Ladee, you're about to teach. And I, as somebody who teaches as well as arts administrators, I completely, I don't know about you, but I find it exhausting. I have a hard time, especially if I'm teaching something directly related to what I'm trying to write or what I'm working on, my project. Like I've been writing about grief and joy in the morning, right? And so teaching a class about our ghosts or about joy or about grief, I was just like, I could work on y'all or I could work on me, but I can't work on both of us. And so I had to put a pause on that writing at least.
Interesting.
What is that process like for you? How do you balance this?
The teaching part, I hadn't done it for a while, and it's only been a month. It's actually I think it's been good for me. I don't know, just to have the reverberations of other people talking about their work has actually been really invigorating for me. But yeah, I haven't I was on a bit of a hiatus for a couple years, so it feels kind of new again. And yeah, it's actually been, I think, very helpful in terms of my focus. Yeah.
What did you do during your hiatus? Tell us about what you were able to create during your hiatus.
Well, I had those 2 books came out, The Rib King, and then the next year the Last Suspicious Holdout. So I've been really fortunate and able to focus on just working and writing. Yeah. Yeah.
So were you okay? Once
Yeah.
again, I'm like, is there a magic button to split the brain from like it's now time for the business side, it's time for the creative side? How did you balance that with
I
like because you had a tour, right? And you had to like market
Yeah.
promo.
Yeah, and I have like I'm here. I'm in Iowa right now. My sons they're still very
We
requiring.
can't hear him. Y'all right.
Okay. Okay. He's right in the other room. Yeah, I'm pretty obsessive. I think I'm pretty
Ooh,
obsessive. I have a need to write every day. Like I'm one of those people. So I always get
You.
up or else I'm very agitated. I notice this about myself. Like if I don't get up before I have to like take my kids to school or go to work or something like that, I will be very agitated for the whole day. So it's
interesting.
better for me to just force myself. I'm often very sleep deprived. So, but it's all right. It just I need to do that in the mornings. So,
Interesting. Okay.
yeah.
Might be my problem. You say you're agitated when you don't write. Absolutely. Look at you.
Well, I'm often very sleep deprived, though. It's true. It's like I have to get up. So, yeah.
You still got to do the life, the living part of life. So,
Yeah.
or is it the living part, or is it
Well,
the
it's just that you have a lot of responsibilities. Everybody
yeah?
has stuff they have to, it's required that you attend to. That's what it
How do
feels
you
like.
pull yourself back out? Can you talk about that? Because I could imagine, I mean, I write poetry for the most part, essays maybe, right? So like you pull yourself out when the thing is done and it's
Mm,
not going to take you necessarily all, but like you build whole worlds, right? So you're trying to hold a world in your head and characters in your head that are speaking to each other. How do you pull yourself back out if when you get the obsession, or do things get sacrificed for it?
oh, that's a very interesting and complicated question.
Good.
I don't no, but I love it. Like if I can immerse myself in
Hmm.
like a world, that's when I'm happiest, is when I'm
Mhm.
like situated inside my story and with the other characters and stuff like that. So um things probably get confused for just my strange personality all the time. I mean, things get sacrificed all the time.
So
Just
social
yeah.
politics maybe get a little swept to the side every once in a while. You talking in an accent that isn't yours because
No,
somebody's
no, I
speaking for
don't do
you.
that. I don't it's no, I don't do that. I don't do that. I don't become the characters. I don't think I become the characters, but I
Mm,
like being in their world and I like hearing their voices. I don't think I've ever confused their voices for my voice though.
mm,
I mean,
mm.
yeah. Yeah.
I agree
Boy.
with that. I
Yeah.
agree with that. And for me, it's I think sometimes what gets me into the work is I'm really writing my mother and father's story.
Hmm.
Um, and it's a little bit of a difficult story. And it's I think what gets me into it is one, I do carry pictures of them, what they look like,
Mm.
when they were younger or trying to make a way for themselves. So, and I do listen to the music of that time period, which really just puts me right into the spirit of
Ooh.
that moment. And it honestly, it because we were a large military family traveling through the South, it's very easy to go there.
Mm,
Once the music hits me, I remember those moments so clearly. So I'm really that kind of feeds my spirit getting into the story. But one thing that I'm really clear about is sometimes children, because one of my characters is a young character. Sometimes I think the children experience things that they don't really have the benefit of an adult guiding them to
mm,
help them understand what they experience. So that child takes what they think they see, what they think they know, and they build a conversation around that. And unless an adult walks in and tells them or explains to them what exactly happened, think about how we carry that thought or those
Mm,
feelings all of our lives into our adulthood, not really knowing. And I'm finding I love exploring the idea of how a child sees something,
mm.
their perspective, and something maybe that's an adult thing or the complexity of an adult life and trying to figure it out. So I find joy in that exploration. And I don't know.
mm.
It's
I can totally relate to that because like the my first novel was very much inspired by my grandfather, and I think I started writing it like right after he passed, and it was definitely in part a way of holding him to me. Do you know what I mean? Like to it was like a continuing a conversation with him, and that inspired me a great deal. So yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, I could
So
feel it.
remaining in conversation
Yeah,
with elders and ancestors, and even like your child self in a way, like
yeah.
your child self as an ancestor, which is fascinating to think
That's
about.
interesting. Your
Yes.
child self as an
An
ancestor.
Right,
ancestor.
that's what I got. I was like, "Did you say
Wow.
that, Carla?" I don't think you said in those words,
Wow.
but yeah, that's I'm gonna have to really
Absolutely.
think about that.
But the other
Some
side of that too is exploring why adults make the choices that they make. You know,
Right.
because we're always trying to figure out our parents,
That's
always
right.
trying to figure out like why did they do that. And I have the benefit of having a lot of siblings. And
Mm,
one of the things I've noticed is sometimes my history of something might be different from my sisters or
right.
my brothers. And when we talk about that situation, they'll tell me their experience and
Mhm.
I'll tell them mine, and they're a little bit different.
Yeah.
Right.
It kind of makes you explore the idea of how we misread things, or how adults can do things, and we totally misunderstand their actions, but
Yeah.
how it feeds into our imagination and what we think they did and what we think they meant when they said certain things,
The
and how we
story we continue to tell ourselves
yes,
and
yes,
build a whole like identity on, especially with family of origin things.
yes,
My mom passed 8 years ago on as of yesterday actually, and
Mm,
so my sisters and I were just having a conversation about like, wow, we're still spending our lives like trying to win the love and approval of the
mm,
dead, and
mm,
and my sister was like, and we had it all along, like that was a,
wow.
and so I was one who said like I'm still trying to win her approval, and my sister was the one to remind me like we've always had her approval, she's always loved us and approved of us, and it's like easier for her to hold on to that piece than it
yes,
is for me. And a lot of my writing is like, oh, the story I have a poem, we grieve different people when we say mother, because it's like the mother that they're grieving, I'm like, some days I don't even recognize this person. I'm like, when did
Wow.
she do that? Why would
Wow.
she say that? What was like, that's not the mother that I built in my head. And so
absolutely,
unpacking like how many of my adult decisions now are the result of the story that I told myself as a 5-year-old with no facts
That's
really
interesting.
in
absolutely,
mind, right? Like, isn't that like our work is as in growing and remaining in conversation?
trying to
I'm glad
figure
you
it out.
had siblings. Yeah, trying to figure it out.
Yeah,
Right. It turns out that we're all walking around with our own story of how
yeah.
it's going.
But the joy of it to me is in discovering those stories, right?
Right. And sharing dialogue.
Absolutely. Because part of my thing was trying to figure out why adults do the things they did, what
Mm,
made them make those choices. And then living in that time frame, sometimes, especially women, I think, made choices because they were limited in certain ways. I'm talking about women in the 50s and 60s,
Mhm.
certain things that they couldn't do or they weren't. Um, it's part of it, I think, is just the idea of, how do you about desire in a woman who is a mother?
hmm.
Desire has been squashed. How do you talk about that? Because all along it was, in her. She just couldn't get out. I don't know. I love the idea of explorers who are maybe a little different and just turning that story about what people there is. Because maybe she's not the kind of mother that's in our heads, but maybe she's a mother who wants more than what people think she want, um,
Mm.
and how she goes about getting it.
How she goes about getting it. That's a beautiful pivot.
Mm.
First of all, Carla, I do want to back up a little bit. Can you tell us about the story that you're writing, the story that you are teasing out, and why it's so important for you to tell it?
Well, I
And I
am
love
teaching
this. I just
out.
quoted you. How do you talk about desire in a woman when that
Mm.
desire has been squashed? I love that. Come on,
Well,
Carla.
this book started out as a story of a young military family, black family, and in that time frame they called them Negro families. How they traveled the South, and then I realized the more I wrote the story, the more I realized it wasn't that story at all. It was more
Mm.
of a tug of war between the mother and the daughter. The mother's
Ooh.
name is Madeir, the daughter's name is Eudora, and the idea of here you had this mother who traveled as a military wife from place to place, a lot of times in a car because back then Black people could not ride in a train comfortably, so they had their own cars, and that became a little bit of their home. But it started becoming more of a story about the mother and the mother who does something that's flawed, that makes her flawed in her children's eyes, and how she walks through that nature of being a flawed parent, how she tries to hold on to it. And the Eudora, the daughter, trying to understand her. I'm probably not saying it the right way, but
that sounds fascinating.
What drives me to write the story is we don't hear a lot about Black military families. We don't hear a lot about the interior lives of those families. When the father goes off to war in Vietnam, we didn't hear their stories. The men didn't talk about them. And to me, it's time to talk about them, what it was like to have, to be part of a war that you wanted no business in, and having a war at home, linking those two stories and what the children felt versus what the parents felt. So I'm trying to merge them. And that's why I call it Where the Spirit Meets the Bone. Medea being the spirit of the story. Eudora being the spirit of the story, trying to figure things out, and Medea being the bone, the backbone of making their lives together.
That's a beautiful title. That's
yeah,
beautiful.
I love that title. You're a poet on that one.
I just need to get the story done. Trying to get it done.
Speaking of which, our applications are open for our residency. So if you need a residency and you have not come to Hedgebrook yet, please do apply. As Carla said, it is so, like, I find it crucial to begin like a huge project of any kind. Like it's so hard to carve out space. Something you said about it changing to being the story about the mother and the daughter, it made me think, Ladee, talk about how, do you feel like you write more menfolk stories? Like, I think it's really interesting that you speak from a man's perspective often in your work, but not. Talk about that, please, a little bit.
You know what, I was thinking about that because the things I'm writing now it's two projects and they're all from women's perspective, and I was thinking about why I did that, and I realized that it helps me. You were talking about me confusing myself for the character, but sometimes it disrupts the story. And I do think that that was in part, if I'm being perfectly honest, a way to keep me from confusing the character from myself and not letting my own issues and things sort of like start to invade the character's story. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Very interesting, because I thought about that a lot. Like, why is that? Why do I do that? And I think, if I'm being honest about it, that is part of why I did it, because then it's definitely not me that I'm talking about. And I think sometimes I'm trying to tell someone else's story, and a lot of times that it would just turn into like my own, grievances. A certain situation would come up, I'm like, I know how that feels. You know what I mean? It would just be about like me, and I'd be like, no, I don't.
This ain't about me. This ain't about me.
Well, no, and it actually was very helpful for me to do that. I think I need to, at a certain point I had to like actually look at what was going on with that, but I think it was really necessary for me, just as part of my own maturation, I guess. Do you know what I mean? I don't know if that makes sense, but it really is.
So now you're leaning into it, and your new work is going to have.
Oh yeah. No, they're all women in this project, but that's like interesting that you brought that up, because I think that in part was kind of like something I was like, oh, you need to be conscious about that. Like, why do you do that? Or what, you know what I mean? So, and it's not a criticism. And I love men, and I feel like I should be able to write as whoever I want. But I realized I do think that's part of what is at times going on with me. It's a way of distancing myself from the character so that I can just see their experiences.
You can just.
I'm trying to figure out how you work with two books in your head.
Well, isn't that interesting? It's actually what I was writing was getting too dense, and I realized I needed to make it two separate. It's all part of the same obsession. It's different manifestations of the same obsession. So I can't not work on these. It seems to be something I really need to do right now. but it was getting too, there was just too much going on. And I was like, oh no, you need to separate them into two separate sort of narratives, and that will make them both make sense. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. It was too much going on. There were just too much like side issues and all kinds of stuff getting put in. I was like, no, you can't fit it all in one story. So
that's interesting you say that too, Ladee, because I know when I'm working on my piece that I have to really work on Medea for a long time and push Eudora to the side.
Interesting.
I don't need her young voice in my adult head as I write this story.
Interesting. Yeah.
And it takes a moment. So when I do come to a residency and I know I'm going to be working on Eudora's part, I really have to kind of just get into the frame of mind of the way a child would envision things and what a child would think versus an adult. And it is a different mind space.
That's beautiful. Yeah, it is. I think I was very emotional when I started. I was like very upset about a bunch of stuff. And it was like they're related, but they need to be sort of like given their own tracks and their own space. So, yeah.
So
does that make sense?
No, totally it does. I love that it like grew and then split into two. It grew two monsters essentially. My question is, so Carla, I know your story is inspired partially by the way you grew up, right? Like the way you were raised in a military family, and this is a story that you don't see out there. Ladee, will you talk a little bit about how what is your connection, your personal connection to the stories that you write?
Well, as I said, the first one is there's a lot of my grandfather, and I think the inspiration for writing it was to stay there. It's funny because I was talking about writing for male characters, and it's like an older man. It's a road trip, and it's an older man, and there's like a very awkward child, a girl that's in the back seat of his car the whole time, and that's probably me because I spent a lot of time with my grandfather. So that's what I was saying. I think it was easier to write try to write from his perspective for a whole lot of reasons than to write as the little girl in the back seat, you know? And then the story, and then the Rib King is actually a prequel to that. So there's a lot of sort of my family history actually embedded in that. And actually in the second section, because it's two sections, and one is told from the perspective of the Rib King, and then the other section is told from a woman who was a maid in the house where the Rib King was a butler. And that section, there's a lot of my grandmother in that as well. So I think, yeah. So both of those were really ways for me to feel connected to people, ancestors that meant so much to me, and probably too to express my deep and abiding gratitude for having them as a presence in my life, and so that in some ways it was both of them were tributes to my grandparents. The story collection is actually, a lot of the stories are based on experiences that I had. So I used to spend, from when I was a baby, every summer with my grandparents in Florida. So I lived in all different places with my mom, but every summer I would go and I'd spend the summer with my grandparents in St. Petersburg, Florida, which is where they lived. And a lot of the stories in the collection are based on experiences that I had there. And some of them are based on it. It's funny. It's not literal. It's like the feel of my experiences there. Cause I know a lot of New Orleans and other stuff is, I was talking to someone, it's not literally a place, right? Like, it's not like exactly that place, but a lot of it is based on experiences that I had when I was with them in the summers. And it's funny because I don't think I realized before I started writing the novel how much that those experiences really meant to me, because it, like, my grandmother's home wasn't really like my home, whatever that means, you know what I mean, with my mother. And then I was like, oh my gosh, the experiences you had with them were so important to you, and it sort of finds expression through the things you feel compelled to write about, you know? So,
Wow.
yeah.
So
So
it
I
like seeped in.
yeah. Yeah, well, I'm not even seeped in. It's just it is interesting what you find yourself sort of compelled to talk about. Um and a lot of it does have to do with my ancestors, I guess is how I would put it, and how yeah, how much I'm grateful to them. I have a lot of gratitude for their experiences and the strength the strength of imagination required to get me born. That's
To bring this
a lot
into
of work.
being.
It was a lot of work. They went through a lot. So
Yeah.
yeah. Hmm.
I love that idea of compelled. So Carla, I want to ask you this. I want to talk about like, so do you I call it, because I grew up in a very fundamentalist church. I call it a calling. Like I've been very aware that I have a calling, and that I think of it as being used as a vessel. Like it's the ideas are out there. They came to me because I'm blessed. If I can put it out there and put it on paper and put it out into the world, then I'm blessed to be chosen for that. But if I don't, if I miss the mark, the muse will bounce on to the next one. The muse
Absolutely.
is good on it, right? Like it's like, okay, great, you missed your shot. Let's move it. And I see, like I'm sure you both experienced like, oh, I had an idea of something like that, or I was just working on something like that, and here it comes somebody else with that kind of idea. I do believe in synchronicity, but I do know that there's certain things that come to me specifically, and it's really my calling. It's really my compelling obsession that I have to get them out. It becomes a thing that I have to get out. Do
Absolutely.
you feel that way, about this story, and do you feel that way about other stories? So do you have more stories in you that are coming right after you can finally get this one out?
Oh yeah. And here's the thing. I think a lot of us know that we were born writers, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
That you were observing. I know for me, excuse my dogs in the background.
No worries.
Me, I always felt like my emotions were really intense.
Hmm.
I mean, very at a very young age, if it was rage, it was intense rage. If it was joy, it was intense joy. And the idea of trying to understand how someone else felt about something. Those were really always very intense, scary feelings for me. And the best way to do it was to write it down. So I think I became a poet first, understanding the power of words and language. And if you don't think words are powerful, have someone call you something and see how you react.
Hmm.
And that's either a negative something or a positive, right? So that power, there is power in language. So I always knew I was going to be a writer. And I knew that, I tell many people that I discovered poetry in the military. We went to libraries, had great schools, but I didn't read anything about Black writers until I was in sixth grade.
Mm.
Yeah.
And I went to a public library, scanning the shelves, and discovered Black poets on the bottom shelf of a Willingboro Public Library. And when I discovered it, when I opened the books to Haki Mudabu, who's now Donnell Lee at the time, Lucille Clifton, Nikki Giovanni, Caroline, when I read them, I realized, wow, those words moved me. And I realized I had to write. I had to write down what I was feeling. And after a while, the poetry wasn't enough. I knew I wanted to tell a larger story. I knew that there were things that are inside me that had to get out. Um, and there was something about building a world out of, I mean, you think about it. Here create a story with characters that are in my head. But when you read my story, you see another world. That's pretty powerful to me. What
Yeah.
writers do is very powerful. So to me, I want to get this story about this young military family moving through the South. I want to get out Medea's story about how she fell in love with someone she had no business falling in love with. I
Hmm.
want to tell about Eudora, who, kind of shamed her mother into feeling certain ways, but then after a while, kind of understood that everybody deserves love, right? Everybody. Um, but my mother died in 2013, January
Hmm.
1st. My brother on the back end died December 27th. And what I realized upon her death, because she died of pancreatic cancer and it took 18 months. Usually that's once you're diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, you don't have that many months. But she survived it for 18 months. But I realized during that time period that we don't talk enough about death.
That's right.
We don't talk enough about grief. And there's something powerful about coming to the understanding that someone who has loved you all of your days unconditionally is no longer with you. And I know I've already started that story. And there's something too about when someone dies in your family, what happens to all the members of that family?
Mm-hmm.
A very close family can become somehow undivided for whatever reason. Doesn't mean forever, but at that moment when everyone's experiencing that loss, how to explore that. So that's the next story I'm looking at, and how sisters do it. How sisters wrestle with grief and loss of someone as big as a mother. And I always have this thing when mothers die, the world stops for a second. The clouds stop, and I don't know. There's something about the powerful about a mother dying and how we feel unmoored about that. And I know not everybody has that experience about a mother, so I'm really clear about that. But I want to talk about it openly. I want to just kind of like stick that vein and find out what it's all about.
Find out. Yeah, I we'll be talking then, because that is my work right now for sure. And exactly that, like what happens, it's I feel like in a lot of ways everything was moving at a different pace for me than the rest of the world for the last 8 years, right? So February 15th, 2015 for me. So sorry for your loss. Like it's like one of those things, like it never ends, but it changes. And what happens when you find yourself, I was just telling my sisters, like I found myself, I'm like, I'm in my 40s. How did that happen? Like I looked around and was like, what happened to like a decade of my life? Like it and so many things happened, right? Like so many wonderful things. And how do you confront those things too? Like the gifts that grief brings you. I think this is
gifts.
yes, there's so many gifts. Like I think I know for sure I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be working at Hedgebrook. I wouldn't have come to Hedgebrook. I came to Hedgebrook on poems I wrote about my mom dying. Like that's what I applied with that year. And it was so urgent. It was there during the anniversary month too, February 2017, Ladee. Yeah, it was, it's super interesting to me how, like I keep thinking of it as like the water rising up out of the ground a little bit, like how it flavors and you see you're like I'm actually the little girl in the back seat, but I need to tell the story this way so that I can figure out what the story is that I got to tell. I can't tell it from my perspective, or I'll get lost in my
Well,
perspective.
see, there you sound like me. That's exactly what I mean.
This is what I'm saying. It's like I heard you saying, oh right, so it does this. I just realized that I've only written about love. Not I can only. My new challenge is like, how do I write about love, not using what I think of as love? Like when you think of the love languages, if my love language is touch, right? Then everything I say about love is going to be flavored by that's how I want to be shown love, right? So what would it be to write a love story about two people who really were like about that acts of service? That's not my jam at all, man. Like how would I get into that perspective, and what would it like open up for me about how I see the world and how I color the world? I love that, of like if you take yourself completely out, it gives you a chance to see how much you're in it.
Right.
I love the idea too, though, of trying to figure out what someone else thinks that is totally different from the way you think. Honestly, I think that's the biggest way to grow a writer. When you say, okay, this is how I believe, and now I'm going to walk across the street and be someone else and firmly embrace their way of being. It does grow you because it makes you think outside of the box, outside of your own, agency. And it's a little bit different. You kind of have to start pushing the boundaries. Like, what would that person say? Not you.
Right.
The spirit of that person, what would they say?
How can you believe in that? Like, how could you believe something that is foreign to how you believe?
Yes.
Yeah, that's I I admire fiction writers who could do that because I don't want to be sympathetic. You know what I mean? Like, I'm like, oh, that requires a compassion that I don't know if I have. My friend Sonora just put out The Laughter, and her protagonist is a white male. And it's wonderful to see all this response of like, she really captured the voice and everything like that. And I'm like, I don't want to live in that head. Like I'm good. Before we move to my final question, Lauren had this great question. Um, you both are drawing on your beautiful live experiences for your work. What do you think writing will be like for future writers who have virtual and social media as their primary experiences? And like, this is we all have children of varying ages, but deep up in the technology age range. All of us, none of us have super young kids. So what do you think? What do you think is going to happen with these youngins?
You know what? It's so interesting because Zay, the one upstairs, is 10, and he was so affected by the quarantine. Like, I feel like his mind was just completely altered. Now everything is true. It's like that's how he interacts. That's how it just normalized interacting all the time with his friends on it. I don't know. You know what? I think it would, because it's a different situation. I used to be really worried about that, in part because I don't understand it. It's not the way I relate to people, and it doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't appeal to me in the same way that it does to him. But every now and then I think sort of like creativity and imagination it will find expression through that. Do you know what I mean? Like there'll be experiences, there'll be different experiences from mine, but I do kind of, just looking at him and knowing who he is, I do feel like he's just like a fundamentally creative person, and it will deeply shape how he interacts with technology as well. So that might be very naive. I don't know. Sometimes I'm like, I don't know. But it's true, all of them, because I have older ones too, and they all like, sometimes like, what are you doing? And they'll tell me, and I'll just be like shocked, because it actually is really creative, and I don't understand it. So I'm not used to, and I have no desire to, honestly, to interact with it. Doesn't appeal to me in the same way. But I think new forms of art, or at least new preoccupations, obviously are going to manifest themselves because of it. But I do think that people are just fundamentally, I do believe in human creativity, and that it will find a way to, express itself in new forms.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I kind of believe that, when you pick apart the notion of story, right? Story can be so many things. I know when I was growing up, you had to either be a poet, an essayist, a novelist. You couldn't be any, once you were a poet, you were, that was what you did. Nowadays, it's different. And my thing is, I think the future is going to hold, a different way of telling a story. It might be poetry in intermersed with creative nonfiction, with not, I'm not sure what we're about to see, but I think young people will teach us do it a different way. And I'm excited about that. I'm also excited by the idea of, I think the pandemic taught us that there's a different life coming, right? And we don't know always the consequences of having been shut down for 2 years.
Right.
All the things that are going to show up that we're going to have to write about, even simple things that we didn't think of, So I'm excited for that. I'm excited for what we're going to do and how we're going to play around with just what a story is and how we're going to receive it. And the story might not just be something written on a page. It might be something that we hear. And I don't know. I just think the creativity out there is, pretty immense. And I am happy to be a part of it. I do, kind of like Ladee, I do want to, the idea of remembering the classic ways of telling stories too.
Yeah. But that's, our job, right? It's to make sure that it's a well-rounded curation.
Yes, absolutely. I love a good story, just to sit down and it doesn't have to be fast-paced. It just has to be story and characters that I'm going to remember. And for me, when I read a book, I don't necessarily remember all the things that happened in that book, but I definitely remember how I felt when I read that book.
That's right.
Wow.
I remember that part.
Yeah. I think it's so interesting. um, because of the lockdown, especially, they kids access tools that I'm not interested in
Interesting.
accessing or learning about, or my kid got good on some things where I was like, I
Right.
don't even talk. I don't want to know. Just this is it. Just go have fun. But weirdly, as you were talking, I was like, you know what? It may be that they've cracked the code on entering dialogue with people that they
Right.
don't necessarily agree with.
That's
um
that's
Hearing a lot of
interesting.
perspective, because they could only talk, and they
Right.
didn't get to like opt out of situations just
Absolutely.
because, you know or just go to places where they knew they'd be surrounded by people who
Right.
thought like them. They were encountering people who already had an entry point of like interests, right? Like
Really.
maybe they were both into Minecraft or whatever. And so
Right.
they're already meeting on common ground,
Yes.
even if from there they realize, oh, we're not alike at all. And maybe I don't even like this person, but they
Absolutely.
have to, I don't know. I have hope for the children. Children
I
are the
do
future.
too.
I
I do
believe
too.
in this.
As long as they're reading, yes.
Yes, as long as, and the other thing about storytelling is like, my kid loves me to tell them a story. Just tell them a story,
Mm-hmm.
and they can make up a story off, in the drop of a hat. They could just make up something and go with it. And we've like cultivated that. And
Yes.
there's been some frustration because I'm like, just write it down. If you wrote down your stories, you could have a published book by now if you wanted. You could have whatever you wanted. And they just won't write it down. And then I'm like, how much are we stuck? Because when you said, Carla, you said, as long as they don't forget or we don't lose the old ways of telling stories. And I was like, well, how many old ways do we need to keep? You know what I mean? Like, we're telling stories. If we're telling stories and we're sharing and we're passing down the word, and we're, finding ways to like feel the need to capture that story, like you are, Carla, like, I got to capture this story because it wasn't written down and I know it
You
because
see
I
about right.
experienced it, like, if we're drawn in that direction, I think that like maybe that's the piece that's just a different tool now. Like, they have
Yeah.
a different tool. They don't need to write it down. They've got tools that write it down for them. And that's
Right.
okay. And to like to figure out where we're being precious about the way that we were given it, the way
Yeah.
we were given the ability to tell a story, and
Right.
say, "Oh, it's okay for there to be new tools involved."
Yes. You know
I
what, Amber, one thing that I'm really um have a little bit of a I don't know, a thing that I want people to do though is to talk to our elders,
Yes, please.
because our
Yes.
elders, they're filled with stories. And I learned, as my father gets older, asking questions, and when my mom was alive, asking questions, more pointed questions about their lives that
Mhm.
they didn't necessarily share without being
Right.
asked, right? So
Yeah.
to me, I want to hear those stories because I mean they were young ones, they were doing all the things.
That's
Find
right.
out what they were doing, and even their little mannerisms or what was popular then, or the phrases then. I just think somehow we need to hold on to the history of some of that as we're
Get
moving forward.
curious. Yeah.
It's important. It is important. You're reminding me there's some people I need to talk to.
Yeah, I was like,
Yeah.
man, you know how many times I wish that I had more recordings of my mother's voice, right? And I was absolutely, that's how I knew I was a writer, is because
Yes.
I kept asking the questions. I was like, and then what happened?
Mm.
And then
Yes.
what happened? And how did you feel when that happened? And then what, like,
Yes.
I wanted to know. I wanted to know. And I just, they call me nosy, but it turns out that I just had an inquiring mind. You know what I mean?
Who are you as a writer if you're not curious?
It's right.
Right.
That's right.
Mhm.
You
Come
have to
on
lead with
now. We're gonna ask
curiosity.
those questions. And to
So
me, I want to ask the questions that nobody wants to answer.
that's
Mm.
right.
I want to get real close and say, okay, lean in and like tell me that part.
Right, because
The
that's how
part
you
that you're
learn.
leaving
Like,
out.
ooh, that's how you learn. That's how I have a picture of my mother that is whole, that is
Mm.
like her as a whole person and not just her as
Yes.
my mom. It's because I ask questions about things that ain't got nothing to do with me or
And
none of
you
my
have no
business.
business asking, right?
That's right.
No
That's right. No
business.
business. And you know what? Bless her heart, she told me.
That's
Yes.
beautiful.
And it wasn't fun to hear,
Right.
but she told me.
No.
Um, Before I let you go, I always ask this, and I especially ask this of Black women because I gotta know. What do you do to feed your joy? What are some little things or big things that you do that just light you up from the inside out? How do you feed your joy?
I know. I try to feed my
Difficult questions.
day. Seriously, one, I listen to music, all kinds of music. I will listen to sad music. I will listen to music that makes me dance. And usually, when I go away on a residency, I play music and I do dance in my cottage.
Mm.
And I always light candles and little joy like flowers. Sitting down with someone, a friend, and just talking and not having an agenda.
Yeah.
And being outside to me is a big deal.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't know. I need to think about that more. I need to cultivate finding more joy, because the first thing that came to mind was actually my son. And I love spending time with my son. I get a lot out of that. As much work as it is, I realize that I get so much energy and just from love. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, I was like, my sister and I were just talking about this. We're like, isn't it cool that we raised some of our favorite people? Like, I actually love hanging out with my kid. Like, my kid is awesome. My kid is funny and smart and like insightful. It makes me think. For the most part, I really like my kid the most.
See, I have 3 wild, willful kids, and anyone that knows them know they're mouthy. They have their own little spirits about them. But I have learned a lot about them. I've learned how to kind of just love people who are different from me, give them space to just be who they are. That's been a big deal.
That's awesome.
Also, when you guys were talking, I was thinking about how having children and being a parent really humanized my own parents for me.
Oh, Lord.
You see how hard it is in so many different ways to do that. So I have learned an incredible amount, not just about being a child, but being an adult.
Yeah.
From them.
Yeah. Especially when you hit the age
on a regular basis.
I'm sorry.
I said, let's start with making dinner on a regular basis. That taught me, like, okay,
this is hard.
It is. That's a love language right there.
Right. And just like the times when you hit the ages they were, when things happen to you and you're like, how could you possibly have blah, 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 blah. And you're like, oh, because you were like 32.
That's right.
When I was 32, I knew nothing.
That's right.
I had no skills. I would have known nothing about how to deal with this. I would have been lost in the sauce. No wonder you were lost in the sauce. Thank you both so much. Thank you both for joining me, Ladee and Carla. It has been, of course, as I knew it would be, a joy. Thank you for starting off this series. If you want to revisit this conversation or share it with somebody, you can find these on the Hedgebrook YouTube channel, and the audio version will be available soon wherever you find podcasts. The series is presented free of charge to our community. But if you would like to make a donation, I just dropped the donation link in the chat. It is supported by donations from listeners like you. We hope you will join us for more of our upcoming programs, and you can find our calendar of events on our website, which we will be dropping in the comments momentarily. Also, don't forget that our writer in residence application is live. Please do apply. Send it to somebody you know needs to apply. That's how we get more writers. We get more wonderful people like Carla and Ladee. I hit the wrong slide, but then I corrected myself. So that works out. Instead of joining us in March for a cottage chat, consider joining us for Equinox 2023. I just dropped the link. It is our special annual fundraiser, but it also has a program with a conversation much like this. It's on Sunday, March 19th at 12 p.m. It's free to live stream, so just click on the link and RSVP now. And don't forget to apply. We'll be right here on April 20th, Thursday, to celebrate Poetry Month at 4 p.m.